Welcome to Baseball and Coffee with Aaron and Tino. This is our Outfielder 1 podcast. We're going to do the top 16 outfielders, assuming a 16-team league, because we play in a head-to-head 16-team league ourselves. Aaron, how you doing?
Good. How are you, Tino?
I'm good, man. Good.
Good.
Do you have any
Good.
coffee thoughts from this week? Anything fun?
Just really been enjoying leaning back into the Chemex. And yeah, that's really it. I don't have too much else this week for coffee.
What's
Been
your
pretty tame
Chemex
week.
recipe?
45 grams of coffee and 720 grams of water.
Do you do multiple bloom? Do you do kind of one bloom all at once?
Definitely multiple. Yeah, like 4 to 6 pours.
And what's your drop time?
Anywhere from 4.5 to 6 minutes usually.
Awesome.
It's funny. I was telling someone today. Have you ever put fruit on when you make a cold Chemex in the bottom? I have not done that because it's freezing here in Pennsylvania right now. But we were talking about brewing Chemexes. He actually worked at Seattle Roastery, where you and I worked, and we were talking about coffee presentations and things. And yeah, sometimes in the summer I'll put fresh fruit in the bottom of the Chemex underneath the ice, like oranges or lemons, and then ice, and then do the pour. And you get like a kind of a citrus infusion. It's really quite nice.
Nice.
One of my favorite things to do with the Chemex. So
that's awesome. I've been in Spokane for the weekend and at an Airbnb, and they left I'm sorry, I don't remember the roastery, but they left a really nice bag of Central American coffee and typical like city roast kind of hipster style. But incredibly a pretty beautiful coffee. So I brought my Baratza with me so I could grind myself. And they have your standard, kind of metal basket brewer. And the cool thing is that we've been brewing coffee so there's 4 couples here, and been brewing coffee for everyone else. And we've had multiple comments of the coffee seeming to be really sweet. And so they ask, where's this coffee from? And you show them the bag. But what I try to explain is that it's not necessarily the coffee itself and the way it's roasted that's giving you the sweetness. It's the fact that you've got the correct grind and good water quality and coffee brewed at the right temperature that are creating the correct variables, the correct formula to make a really beautiful cup of coffee, right? I think so many of us are used to pre-ground coffee or coffee ground on the wrong grind or water not at the right temperature, or whether it's overly green or overly roasted or coffee past roast date, way past roast date. I don't think the common person that's not interested in coffee understands how many variables go into making a really beautiful cup of coffee. And so it's been really cool to serve these cups of coffee where people are like, this is really sweet. This is awesome. I don't really care whether they acknowledge the fact that it's the grinder and the attention that's been paid. It's just that they're experiencing this cup of coffee that's different than what they're used to. It's been really cool and really fun.
And it is complex. I think for people like you and I who are very used to it, and we know those details, it's rote, but for people that don't do it, they don't realize all the ways it can go wrong.
Right.
And so many times it's not necessarily the coffee is almost the least important.
Right.
Totally. You're just trying to like get all the elements out of the way so you can taste the coffee.
Totally.
But people are just not used to thinking about it in that way.
It's interesting because I think that's the exact, like the perfect terminology or way to put it is it's what can go wrong. It's not necessarily what can go right. There's so many things that can go wrong with brewing a cup of coffee that people just don't understand that. Like, you could have the coffee for 2 weeks. You could have the the roaster grind it 4 days ago, then it could oxidize. It could be that the water that's coming out of your tap is 190 degrees instead of like 203, right? Like it could be any number of things. But yeah, it's super, super, super interesting. So that's been really fun for me to share with people who don't typically do it.
Yeah, I love that coffee's been part of your weekend with your friends, and it's the way it
Always,
should be.
you got to bring it.
Brings people together.
Agreed. So I don't think we've had any trades in our league to discuss
No,
this week. Is that right? Any interesting
no,
offers? Anybody you want to out with really, really bad offers?
no. I kicked around, flirting with the owner who has Kinley Jansen,
Mhm.
and doing my pitcher studies this week. I just dove into his arsenal and what he's done the last couple of years, and I came away more impressed, I think, than my firsthand experience of watching him.
Mhm.
I think, as I mentioned on the pod, we lived on the West Coast the last 4 years before we recently moved. Watched a lot of LA. As my wife started playing a little bit of fantasy in like friends league, and so if I was watching the Dodgers, she would watch with me.
Mhm.
So, anyways, I watched a lot of LA. This is what it comes down to, because she owned a lot of those players, and so he almost always put people on base and very rarely had a clean inning, and so I just had this picture of his skills eroding.
Right.
And when I was doing my study, I was like, he's still really, really good.
He's
And
throwing a
so
slider. He's just
yeah, so
started throwing a slider.
I reached in and reached out and kind of, to see if there was anything there, and there really wasn't, but
Right.
didn't go anywhere.
Right.
But I remain interested, and obviously he's a free agent. So,
Right.
and then I also have Blake Trine in that league, so that would also be a little bit of a hedge on that. So, if he does return to LA, to have a higher likelihood of securing at least a closer
Right.
going into the redraft portion of our league. So, yeah, not much to it, but that was really the only thing for me in the
Right.
league this week. It's really quiet right now, really quiet.
It is quiet. For me, the only thought with regards to that league is, do I go back and forth. Do I keep Hunter Green, Luis Patino, or Mike Zanino? I've even entertained Garrett Crochet if his role changes. But as of now, it's Hunter Green, understanding that he may not have a role in the beginning of the year, and understanding that 130 innings from Patino could be really great. I don't like him against lefties. I know his, like, Saris goes on and on and on about stuff plus, and Patino's stuff plus number being, incredibly high. It just is not, I don't, I don't know that he's going to ever be more than a decent kind of fantasy number 4, 5, 6 starter.
You
Uh,
talking about Patino or Green?
Coutinho. Whereas Green has the upside of being a 200 plus strikeout starter with athleticism, and not currently an offense that can carry him to 15, 18 wins, but I think down the road potentially. But I go back and forth every day. I've got one of the three of those players as my number 15 keeper. But no trade offers this week. It like you said, it's been incredibly quiet.
So what is it about Patino's arsenal that you think he's going to struggle against the lefties?
I know his changeup is good. I think that it's hard because he's got 3 pitches that are plus. I Part of me going back and forth is battling I think bias because he's small. Is he going to be able to take on the workload that is worth keeping a pitcher as a, kind of a starter 4, 5, 6 in that range? And then I wonder with Tampa Bay, will he just always be kind of a valuable 4 inning pitcher to them? Will you accumulate wins, which is a category in our league, if they're going to have him go through the lineup twice and not 3 times, right? He's almost more valuable as a setup guy because we value holds, or as a closer, than he would be as a starter for me.
Interesting. No, thanks for sharing that. It's interesting perspective. And I feel you on the keepers. I I literally have had to just make myself stop thinking about it. And it's,
Nice.
it could, because this time of year, I was just every day just diving into it more and more and more. And you can't, I was like, you got to stop until you have more information.
Right.
And but it required a real discipline to force myself to stop
Right.
worrying about it, because it's really tough.
I think that's part of why I unloaded some like Brady House and some of the other players who were kind of in that 14, 15, 16, 17 range was, there's one theory is to keep like your top 18 and even trade for players that you think are on that threshold and give yourself options leading up to the keeper deadline. But for me, there's too much. If I don't make a definitive decision now and even find value for some of the players I'm thinking about, I'm gonna just make myself crazy. I can go back and forth and say Zunino is a top 6 catcher. If I think he's going to do anything close to what he did last year, like he's completely worth keeping, why would I keep really a lottery ticket in Hunter Green? Is it that he throws 104? Is that why I want him? Like, do I want him because he's an African-American pitcher? And like, I believe I want to see more African-American players, succeed in the major leagues. Like, what are my biases making me keep him? Or is he actually the right player for the way in which my team is constructed to keep, right? And you can go through these questions 9 zillion times.
Yeah.
So for me, it's
I really feel you there. I really empathize with that.
That's funny. That's funny. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we will start with our top 16 dynasty outfielders. And we're back. Aaron, tier 1 fantasy redraft outfielder rankings. How many players do you have in your first tier?
1.
And who is that?
It's Ronald Acuna.
Okay. What about him separates him from everybody else for you?
Speed. From a fantasy perspective, I mean, I had 4 players originally in the tier. And as I looked at what he brings from a speed perspective, it was really outside of Cedric Mullins and Starling Marte. He was the only person projected for 20 or more steals.
Right.
And he was bringing the elite contact and power that the other players in my first tier were also bringing, with over 400 OBP. So I felt like his speed is separating him in that group. So I kind of pushed him out of it. So that was my thinking.
So I'm biased because I own Acuna in our league, but I think that, so he's also my number 1. My first tier actually has 4 outfielders. So I've got Acuna at 1, Soto at 2, Trout at 3, and Harper at 4. And for me, they all bring a little bit of something different. My hesitation. So if Acuna was healthy, right? If he had 600 plate appearances last year, didn't hurt his knee, he would be my number 1 and in a tier by himself, right? You're looking at potentially 40-25 or 40-30. If he hits at the top of the lineup, it's 125 runs. If he hits in the middle lineup, it's 100 runs and 100 RBIs. Totally get it. All the skills like across the board are phenomenal. I have down, so his average exit velocity, max exit velocity, hard hit percentage, xwOBA, expected batting average, expected slugging, barrel percentage, walk percentage, and sprint speed were all no lower than the 94th percentile in baseball last year, which is absolutely bonkers. Like, he could hit 50 home runs and steal 30 bags, and I don't think we would blink an eye. And he's 23 years old, I believe. So yeah, he's my number 1. But I look at Soto and my own bias towards a profile that just gets on base all the time and understands the strike zone in the way that Juan Soto does. It's hard for me to not push Juan Soto right up there near number 1.
Mhm.
A 22% walk rate and a 14% K rate is absolutely insane. But he is not surrounded by a very good offense, right? He's
Mhm.
got an offense that is probably going to regress down to kind of bottom 5, bottom 10 in baseball. So he may have a 500 or on base percentage and score 95 runs, right? Like
Mhm.
it could get pretty ugly for him. He's still my number 2. My Trout is it's interesting because his ground ball rate was the highest that it's been since 2012. It's small sample set,
Mhm.
right? But
Sure.
ground ball rate higher, swinging strike rate was the highest of his career. Um, Launch angle was 12.9 degrees, which is a career low, but he's still my Trout. And so where do you put,
Mhm.
I think he's 29 or 30 years old. Where do you put that profile? He's coming off
Mhm.
of injury and he wasn't, he had some stats that weren't great, but his OPS was still 1.090.
Mhm.
Um, I have to believe in the track record of Mike Trout. There's no way I can't put him in the top 3. There's just no way. And then Harper's my number 4. 100 runs, RBIs are the only place where you can nitpick with Trout or with Harper. And the offense around him isn't necessarily going to get any better this year, but he's got double-digit steals, 35 home runs, 300 hitter, way over 400 on base percentage, 1,000 OPS. All of these players represent something different. For me, if I can't get Acuna, it's more about how do I want to build out the rest of my roster and where can I get those players in the first round. If I decide I'm taking an outfielder in the first round, if it's Harper, I've got balance, I've got some steals. I'm going to have to, kind of backfill him with some more RBI producing sorts of players because that's the one stat where he can't produce. If it's Trout, I kind of think the same thing. I don't necessarily see Trout driving in 100 runs. And I also think with Mike Trout, you don't know if he's going to actually steal bases, so you might have to look for some speed as well. And same with Soto, where you're looking for RBIs and steals, right? So all
Mhm.
3 of those players is kind of who are going to be your second and third and fourth round offensive players that are going to be able to build out your team's profile in a way that's balanced. Whereas Acuna kind of checks off all of those boxes. But I love all 4 players. If I, anywhere in the first round, if I can get one of those 4 players, I'm happy.
Yeah. We have the same 4 players. My only change, Tino, is I had Harper instead of flipped.
Sure.
I have Trout third, the same as you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and like you, anyone who listens to the show or knows us, knows that I have a similar bias towards on base and lack of swing and miss and that kind of thing. But I mean, ultimately, from fantasy perspective, walks in and of themselves don't necessarily help us.
Right.
And I would say he's obviously a very talented hitter, very balanced hitter. But ultimately, walks don't really help us. He is by far in the worst lineup of these 4 players.
Right.
And I think so. When I look at his projections for counting stats, I think they're a little inflated. Of where they'll be. I don't think he's going to get much to hit this year.
Right.
So his patience is really going to be tested because for all of his patience, he's also someone who's not shy about wanting to put the spotlight on himself and show how good he is. So
Right.
I just, his skills are unsmirchable.
Mm-hmm.
But I had Harper over Trout second. He's coming off a healthy year. I mean, it's really close. I think Trout is morphing into really a power hitter
Mm-hmm.
and less of obviously a balanced, speed power threat. And I think his sprint speed is still there, as measured by, the metrics that we have, but he hasn't showed a proclivity or willingness to run,
Right.
whereas Harper does. And I think I hear you on Harper's RBIs last year. I read a really interesting result that he had less at bats with people on base than like almost anyone in baseball last year.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think that will repeat. I think it's an anomaly. But his barrel rate and his quality of contact and his on base, like he might be he and Trout are really the only people that can match Soto, probably in terms of walk rate,
Right.
or come close.
Right.
In baseball, and they, I think, bring a little bit more power, and both bat and better lineups. I mean, Trout's going to have, Otani and Rendon, winning him. So
Martian Adele, right?
so and
Kind of
those and that's runs and RBI are 40% of our offensive categories in a 5x5. So
right.
Anyway, I don't think you can go wrong. You're picking nits here.
Right.
I like all the players. I've never had opportunity to roster Harper, but yeah, he's a really dynamic player.
So if I have those 4 players in my top tier, because of, it's kind of like, choose your own adventure essentially, right? Do you have any other, or is your second tier those 3 below Acuna, and then you have a third tier? Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So who leads off your tier 2 or tier 3 or tier 2?
Yeah, it's Jordan Alvarez, and I almost pushed him up into the Soto Trout Harper tier.
Really?
And the reason I did not ultimately was I looked closer at his walk rate and his on base skills. He was clearly a notch below in that area, so I moved him down to lead off the next tier. He was my first one in tier 3 at spot 5.
So one of the biggest, I guess, learnings for me in looking at like the outfield one outfield one candidates is I want balance. I want someone who's going to score runs, drive in runs, and steal some bags. And I think that, like, I look at Alvarez's batting profile, and he's phenomenal, right? He hits the ball incredibly hard. And it's really hard for me I'm not a scout, but if I think of myself as a scout, Jordan Alvarez is like everything I look for from a corner outfielder or a first baseman, like 100%.
Yep.
He's got his average exit velocity, max exit velocity, and hard hit are all 97th percentile. His barrel rate is 91st percentile. His X slug was 95th percentile last year. His launch angle is 14.1 degrees, which is pretty close to optimal. His max exit is 116. He's going to hit 30 home runs and 100 RBIs, and he's a good hitter. He's not like a 45 hit tool, right? He's like a 55 hit tool.
91% zone contact.
Yes,
here's the guys who made more zone contact than him: Miles Straw, Raimel Tapia, Michael Brantley. How's their power?
Right.
Like I mean,
if he could hit 315 with 40 home runs, and I don't think either of us would be surprised.
No.
But he doesn't contribute in steals, and like it or not, stolen bases is a category. For me, he was the third outfielder in my second tier. So I had Tucker above him, and I had Mookie Betts above him. Tucker is not a player that I necessarily love. He actually doesn't hit the ball super hard, but he hits home runs. He scores runs. He's very, very balanced, right? He had 14 steals last year, decent walk rate, low K rate. He's got power. He's 25 years old. He's not quite, for me, he doesn't have the skill set of a Soto or a Trout or a Harper. He doesn't have that kind of power. He doesn't have that kind of discerning eye, but he's got all of the Houston Astro, Tampa Bay Ray kind of markings where swinging strike rate is below 10%. He hits the ball in the air. His launch angle was 17.6 degrees last year.
Right. Yeah, he lifts the ball.
He's optimizing all of the talent that he has to be a home run, 15 steal player. And it's a good offense he's playing in. So he's young. So for me, if I have the choice between Tucker and Alvarez, my heart says Alvarez because I like the big slugger. But from a fantasy standpoint, I believe the right choice would be Tucker in that situation
Okay.
because of the steals and because of all of the kind of underlying, like I said, launch angle, kind of where he's going to hit in the order, scoring runs, all of those kind of boring things that add up to a really, really good fantasy player. I think he has all those things. Betts is at 6. It's Mookie Betts is a hard one because no matter how much so here's a question. How much of Mookie Betts is reputation versus how much of Mookie Betts is actual production? What did you find when you looked at Betts and you were trying to place him in this, kind of rank him in these areas?
Yeah. So I have him at number 7.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of what you said about power and speed in this tier for me, I have Alvarez and Judge on bookending, and then I have 3 players with speed in the middle.
Uh-huh.
So Buxton, Betts, and Tucker.
Sure.
Like you, I have to push past my bias against Tucker. For Mookie, I look at his projections. I think they're inflated based on his track record and what he's done, and not the current player that he is.
Uh-huh.
Again, I'm biased because I've seen a lot of LA.
Mm-hmm.
He did not look like the same player last year. He did not have surgery on his hip. His quality of contact is not as good. And we're talking about a 7.8% barrel rate,
Right.
41% hard hit. However, he also is expected for 369 OBP and at least 13 steals. I think that might be low if he's healthy. I think he might steal more. So I had him below Buxton because I think from a quality of contact and power standpoint, as much as I love Moogie, for me, if I was looking for power or speed, I would take Buxton because I feel like he's going to hit the ball harder. Buxton, I know you love Buxton. He led the majors in expected extra base hits last year, which was a stat that Eno referenced on a Rates and Barrels podcast recently, and I couldn't find it on StatCast. Then I reached out to him and I said, "Hey, where did you find this?" And he sent it to me.
Right.
And actually, Max Bay, who works for the Astros, created the stat.
Right.
But Buxton was number 1. And so it's a predictive stat, and it's looking at quality of contact, speed, angle, all of that. And he was the best. So it just was another reinforcement of the potential that he has and how he's changed his profile. So I'm waxing poetic about Buxton. You asked about Mookie Betts. I have him at 7 because I think that speed is valuable. His speed comes with a great plate approach, a low strikeout rate, a premium lineup, and a great track record.
Right.
I hope that his career he'll bounce back, but I'm wary.
Right.
I'm wary.
It's interesting because 90th percent performance from Mookie Betts it's like 30 home runs and 130 runs in that lineup, right?
Yeah.
With probably 20-25 steals, which puts him probably in the top 5 of fantasy, especially if he has second base eligibility in your league. And so it's hard to ignore that. But I also I hear you with regards to the injury. The interesting part to me was he's never hit more than 32 home runs in a year. And so I think we have this idea that Mookie Betts is more of a power hitter than he is. He does hit doubles, right? And so I think that drives OPS. I also think his walk rate drives OPS as well. But he's not quite the home run hitter that I think we have in our mind, at least I have in my mind. He also has only eclipsed 80 RBIs in 2 seasons. So he had 102 RBIs and 113 RBIs, but he's never had more than 80 after that. And so he's more of what I would think of as a top of the order hitter than where he's typically valued, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
I think that he's still, to me, he has an incredible eye, and his approach at the plate is really, really, really phenomenal.
I love watching his at bats.
Doesn't stress. So his K rate was 84th percentile and his walk rate was 89th percentile. He had a below average hard hit and barrel rate, but I think 100 runs and a 290 to 300 average and close to 400 OBP is not something that is out of reach for him, especially in that lineup. And I have him as my number 6 outfielder above Alvarez and Judge, but that's more of a preference for the type of player that I would want in this particular area than it is thinking that he's not the same or that he's a better player, right? It's more about roster construction, what I'm valuing at this point, than it is actual talent. I believe I can find OPS at other positions easier than I can find runs and stolen bases. So that for
That's
me
fair.
is number 6.
Yeah.
So I have Judge at 8. You said you had Judge at 8 as well?
9.
At 9. And who'd you have at 8?
Tucker.
So what is it about Judge that you like or dislike?
Premium power and run production. His OBP was 394. Expected OBP is 394 and 17% barrel rate. So, no speed, similar to Alvarez, but I think Alvarez is a better hitter. But he brings similar type power production,
right?
And he's shown that. And there's a consistency. There's some guys where I have right below him who I think have similar power ceilings, in their best seasons. But he's someone that you can really rely on, and I think to me that adds value.
Right.
He's a known quantity. I rarely end up with him, but he's someone that I've
just tried to. Yankee, or because you don't get to him in time?
Yeah, I have a distaste for the Yankees. I think my distaste is more about the fans. Although some of the things that you shared about your struggle with them has just deepened my dislike for them.
Right.
But I think the Yankee tax and Boston tax is real.
Right.
We've talked about that with prospects. So Yankee players go higher, and I'm not willing to pay more for someone than I think they're worth unless I really like them, and I don't particularly because he's a Yankee or whatever, and he is so popular.
His current Fantrax ADP is 32.84, which for us is the bottom of round 2, beginning of round 3. And while I love him, I think he's, his hard hit, his max exit, average exit, all those things are like off the charts. I don't. If he was a player who was healthy all the time, absolutely, I think that's a perfect place to pick him. But I think that his ADP is where it is in large part because he's a Yankee. I really do. I totally agree with that. Couple things about him: his hard hit, or he hits the ball harder than really any other player in the major leagues. His outside of the zone contact last year was much higher than it's been historically, and his swinging strike rate was much lower than it's been historically. So his swinging strike rate was 11.3% in 2021. In 2019, it was 14.5%. So he's making a little bit more contact with pitches outside of the zone, which for a power hitter, you could make the case is actually a negative. So if he's making more weak contact, that's not necessarily a good thing, but he takes a lot of walks. Between 2017 2019, his walk rates were 14.3% all the way up to 18.7%. So tons of walks, tons of Ks. I think with health, which we can't predict, I see 40 home runs and 100 RBIs. And I think he added, I don't have it here, but I think he had 6 steals maybe last year. I rank Alvarez above him. I think I like Alvarez better as a hitter than I do. Judge may hit for a little more power, but Alvarez, to me, if we're talking hit tool, Alvarez might be a 55 or a 60, whereas Judge is closer to a 50. And I tend to err on the side of the hitter that is might give me a little bit more consistent 280. Like if Judge hit 245 with 40 home runs, it wouldn't surprise anybody, right?
Yeah, you're right about the 6 steals, by the way. And then 2019 he had 3, and 2018 he had 6 as well.
which is like in a over the grand scheme of things is not necessarily something that is to be taken lightly, right? 6 steals
Right.
from a power hitter is something that can actually put you over the top.
Yeah.
So the last 2 outfielders in my
Hey, real quick, I just have a quick quiz for you because we were talking about name value and tax and stuff.
Mhm.
I know we like round numbers, so I'm gonna throw a round number at you. So in his career, how many seasons do you think that Judge has had more than 100 runs or RBIs?
I'm going to say he had 100 runs one other time and 100 RBIs 2 other times.
One time.
One time, which
2017, he had 128 runs and 127 or
okay.
114 RBIs.
That's injury.
He's yet to eclipse that
Mhm.
again.
So
And
there's
yet you look
the
at his
name value.
projections. Yep, you look at his projections. 97, 109, 96, 92, 96, 93, 97, 97, 100, 107, 103, 107.
Right.
Um,
He's someone who I think we're drafting based on some of the like savant numbers more so than you're drafting on what he's done up to this point. Even though he's considered an MVP candidate and someone with tremendous name value, for me, I'm taking him at pick 33 because he has the talent to put together a huge season, not necessarily because he has.
yeah, I think going through this process with you and looking at the entire player pool and not just looking at the players on my own roster or the players who are going to be released for drafting each year.
Right.
Like it's reopened my eyes to like Statcast and those advanced metrics really should be for identifying change. It's like trying to understand skill and
Absolutely.
behind that before, because baseball, it takes a long time to get a large enough sample to really understand. Well, in our game, if you wait that, you're late.
Right.
You're trying to get ahead of it.
Right.
So valuing track record and production, is actually in a lot of ways more predictive and more valuable. And we forget that like all these StatCast things are in lieu of that. It's like when you don't have that,
Right.
someone adds a pitch, someone adjusts their plate approach.
Right.
We're trying to predict and understand before it's known, before it happens.
Right.
What effect is that going to have? Is this value going to go up or down? Is
Right.
this skill going up or is he in decline? We're trying to figure that out, but that shouldn't come at the expense of what is this track record? What has he actually produced?
Right.
And I think this process has given me an appreciation for that.
I think of the players like so when I build out my SQL tables, I have a fantasy table, which is like statistics based. And I have another table that I call metrics, which are more like savant style statistics or sabermetrics sorts of things, right? And to me, the fantasy table, which is more like fan graphs, counting stats, that to me, that's the what, right? That's what we're judged by. That's what we need them to produce. That's what wins us leagues. But the savant table or the metrics table is the why. And to your point, I want to know why someone's done something. When I see a season that is not in line with the other seasons, my first question is, why is it different? Right. And so historically, you could have looked at BABIP and you would have said BABIP is explaining, this. But we now have statistics that allow us to dig deeper and understand more of what that looks like. And so again, for me, fantasy stats, that's the what, right? That's the meat and potatoes. That's what we get judged by. That's what we need to know. The baseball savant stats, the percentiles, the metrics for me are the why. And so, if I'm trying to make an argument as to why Mookie Betts is the 6th rated outfielder, I can't point to his fantasy stats and say this is why, because last year he was shit. Right. I have to look at I have to look at his history, but I also have to look at his savant numbers, understand his speed and understand his batting eye and all those other things to be able to explain it. But I think you put it absolutely like 100% correctly that they explain 2 different things. And it's really interesting to, as we dig, understand that delineation between, real counting stats and how to tell the story or the narrative, or I guess color in the coloring book, so to speak.
Yeah, for sure.
So you said you had Buxton. Where did you rank Buxton in this tier?
I have him high. I have him at 6.
Okay.
And
Did
I
you have
just,
anybody else in your tier 3?
no.
Okay. So I had, so mine went Tucker, Betts, Alvarez, Judge. So Judge, meaning Judge would be 8. I have Cedric
Okay.
Mullins at 9, and then I have Buxton at 10.
Okay.
So that for me, this is a super fun exercise because I'm usually like way, way, way the high person on Byron Buxton every single time. He's one of my, he's probably my second favorite player in baseball, behind you on
Yeah,
one.
I'm shocked that you have Mullins over him. I can't wait to hear this.
So Buxton, I think anybody listening to this knows Byron Buxton is like supreme athlete. You know, at this point, 30-15 is over 5. If he has 500 plate appearances, everybody expects 30-15 from him. Doesn't really take a walk. He was 5.1% walk rate last year. But his max exit velocity was 116 miles an hour, average exit 93. His launch angle is near optimal. He's 99th percentile sprint speed. You know, he had to learn how to hit the slider. You always saw him, you know, kind of fouling off a fastball down the line in left field, and then, you know, swing and miss with 2 strikes on a slider outside of the zone. It looks like he's gotten to a place where he can actually handle that slider a little bit. But he's the player that everybody loves to dream on. I'm not down on Buxton as much as digging into Mullins. I think the talent that he showed last year was always there. And I just think that he had the plate appearances to actually demonstrate it. So his swinging strike rate was only 8.2%, meaning he puts the ball in play when he swings the bat. And in a park like Camden, that's a great thing for a left-handed hitter. His launch angle was 14.8%, which is pretty close to optimal. And his barrel rate was 8.1%, which is not great, but for a hitter like him with the kind of speed he has is not bad. So he'd never had more than 191 plate appearances in the major leagues in a season up until last year. And and then the park factor, the other additional stat is that the park factor for left-handed hitters in Camden for home runs was 120. And so meaning it's pretty easy to hit a home run as a left-handed hitter in Camden Yards. So to me, if he's never had more than 191 plate appearances as a major leaguer, and last year he was closing in on 600, and we knew he had speed and he was a decent hitter and his launch angle was always optimal. You know, what was keeping him from having the opportunity to show what he had? He's not your prototypical power hitter, but he's in the right park. He's valued by his team. He has speed enough to turn a single into a double and a double into a triple. He produces stolen bases, and he's shown that he has the power to hit it out in that particular park. If he was playing in Detroit, if he was playing in a huge ballpark, I don't think he's half the player that he is. But the reality is he's playing in Baltimore, and he doesn't miss the ball, and he hits the ball in the air, and he's really, really fast. And those things don't change, right? I don't think that his swinging strike rate is going to get to 15% next year. And Baltimore moved the fences back, but they moved them back in left field, not right field. And so for me, I trust what I see in his skill set more than I trust Byron Buxton staying healthy. Do I think Buxton is a more talented player? Yes. Do I think he has more upside? Absolutely. Do I think Buxton could break into the Trout Harper, area if he has 600 plate appearances? I do. I really do. But I think Mullins has the the health and the right field porch, and then Buxton's kind of lack of health history, where I would prefer to take Cedric Mullins over Buxton if I had to pick between the two. Now, Cedric Mullins' ADP currently in Fantrax is 34.93, and Buxton is 64. So I would 10 out of 10 times take Buxton at 64 over Mullins at 35. But I think if everything was even, I'm taking Cedric Mullins over Byron Buxton. I hate to say that, like, Byron, I'm sorry, you're my guy. I love you. Like, you're like family to me, like Yoel Moncada is, but I'm taking Mullins over you if I have the choice. What did you find when you looked at the two players?
Yeah, I mean, Buxton he was what he did last year. You know, I wish he had stayed healthy. I mean, he has like Acuna outside of the walks, which is, you know, a hole in his game.
Right.
You know, there are no perfect players. You know, through 61 games, he posted a 306, 358, 647,
Right.
169, 169 WRC plus.
Right.
And only struck out 24% of the time. 19 home runs. How many doubles? 23 doubles.
Right.
23 doubles.
If you watch the Twins games,
9 steals.
you
and he
watch
wasn't caught once.
And you see him hit the ball down the left field line, and it's either a double or a home run. And you see him do it over and over and over and over again.
And his home plate to first speed, number 1.
Right.
So he leads the league in expected extra base hits. He was the fastest player to first in baseball. And so, yeah, I mean, I know that there's risk. You know, I didn't spend a ton of time on Mullins. I kind of have a little bit of Mullins fatigue, because if I hear one more show say, "Who's this year Cedric Mullins?"
Right.
I'm just gonna go crazy. I know that he brings speed.
Tyler O'Neill.
He taps his. I know that he switched to only left-handed.
Right.
Only left-handed. He was a switch hitter, so you have to kind of throw out his track record or minimize it, because before 2021 he was trying to hit both sides. So we know that there's a change there. So, and when his speed is legitimate, so he brings speed at a position and time in the game where that is needed. I just question the repeatability of the power, and that's why I had him lower. Whereas Buxton, I don't question his power at all.
Right.
You know, so Mullins barreled the ball well. He's certainly in a friendly environment where he's going to get the most out of his power.
Right.
What was his launch angle for Mullins?
It was, I think I said it was 14.
14. Okay, so he's getting good launch when he lifts the ball.
Right.
Yeah. So
I just pulled up Mullins' Savant page, and there's not a single home run that is to the left of center field. And so he's pulling everything into that short porch in right field with the 120 park factor for left-handed hitters hitting home runs. And so I think that a lot of the stats that say that Mullins doesn't necessarily have a ton of power don't necessarily matter, because he's learned how to yank it into the right field of Camden Yards in the same way that Bregman pulls, balls into the Crawford boxes. And so his Savant numbers won't look great, but he's still hitting a ton of home runs. But I'm with you. As far as Buxton goes, like, he's my Superman, right? I absolutely, if I'm rooting for a player to have a career year and actually realize their talent, Byron Buxton is number 1 on that list for me. I watched Twins games as my central time zone team to watch simply because of him. It used to be him and Sano. Now it's just him. So who do you have in your next tier?
So my last tier starts off with 2 Blue Jays, Hernandez and Springer. And then I have the wild card of this group and Louis Robert. And then Yelich, and then Mullins. And then my last spot, I I have 3 players for 2 spots because I kept changing it. I was like, it's time to start the pod. I couldn't decide.
Sure.
So I cheated. I have 17, but I had tied for 15, 3-way tie for 15th. Castellanos, Brian Reynolds, and Tyler O'Neill.
Okay.
I was torn on those 3 players. I think they're all very different.
Sure.
And I just couldn't figure out in my mind how to properly rank them.
Right. It's kind of who, like, what stats do you value, and what do you value as far as like the aging curve, right? Like, do you want the player on the ascent? Do you want the player that had the career year last year? Do you want the player who was playing in like incredible home parks and last year that are going to change, like Teoscar Hernandez? There's a whole lot of I think it's just the eye of the beholder. The idea is that this tier for me looks the same, right? I have Castellanos. So this is tier 3 for me. I have Castellanos, Tyler O'Neill, Teoscar Hernandez, Brian Reynolds, Luis Robert, and then I have another tier where I just have Starling Marte and Randy Arozarena. So the one player I don't have is George Springer that you have. So I have Arozarena instead. But it's just like, what flavor do you prefer, right? I have Marte and Arozarena at the bottom, but that's because part of my filter is to not prioritize steals, I think, in the same way that consensus does. You know, Marte's value comes from stolen bases. He's never had a double-digit launch angle. Last year, it was 4.6 degrees. He's going to hit 10 home runs and hopefully steal 40 bases. And do you value the 40 stolen bases over the 300, batting average of Brian Reynolds? I prefer Reynolds myself. That's just me.
Yeah,
So,
me. Yeah.
So when it comes to that, the bulk of that tier, Castellanos is hard because he's definitely like a 90 run, 30 home run, 100 RBI, potentially 300 hitter. But we don't know where he's playing next year. And he played last year in Cincinnati. And when he played in Cincinnati or played at Wrigley, he was clearly a 300 hitter and a huge run producer, right? Like kind of JD Martinez type.
Yeah.
But when he was in Detroit, he was kind of we didn't really think about him as a fantasy player because he didn't hit home runs. And
here you go. Last year he had 39 home runs playing in Cincinnati. Mm-hmm. Would you like to guess how many he would have hit in Detroit?
23.
Very close, man. 24. Nice job.
Yeah.
So that's 15 home runs difference.
Right. And we don't know where he's signing. So
nope.
His swinging strike rate last year was 15.8%. So there's a lot of swing and miss, and there's no speed. I'm gambling he's going to end up, he's smart enough to not, he was outspoken enough about Comerica Park that I can't believe he ends up in a big park. I just can't. So if he doesn't, he's actually really similar to Yordan Alvarez. He doesn't have the same upside necessarily, but 90 runs, 30 plus home runs, 100 RBIs, decently high batting average is what you expect from him. So picking him at 64 versus Yordan Alvarez at 28, I think I would prefer Castellanos at 64 myself. I have O'Neill.
I'm a little surprised by that, just given his plate approach for you. But it makes sense from a value perspective.
If I'm a GM, give me Alvarez and give me Alvarez at a premium price. But from a fantasy standpoint, in a redraft, Castellanos is my guy at 64. Mm-hmm. It's just considering it's redraft and considering it's fantasy and not real baseball. Mm-hmm. Tyler O'Neill is next for me. I couldn't believe when I saw he had 34 home runs and 89 runs and 80 RBIs and 15 steals. And as a Mariners fan, he's like the AAA Mariners prospect that we traded for Marco Gonzalez. 366 BABIP. and a 16.2% swinging strike rate is just not the kind of player that I take typically. His BABIPs have been historically have been high because of his speed and because he hits the ball so hard. So I can't necessarily knock the BABIP, but the swing and miss is real. And my own biases, I tend to stay away from players who have that much swing and miss in their profile because it means their average can go up and down, right? And so a potential 40 home run player could hit 22 home runs in a year because that was just happened to be one of the years that he wasn't seeing the ball as well. But you can't sneeze at 34 home runs and 15 steals, and so that's why he's ranked where he is. One interesting thing I found with Teoscar is that he was actually a much better player on the road than he was at home. So the first thing that I dug into with Teoscar Hernandez was this a product of Dunedin and Buffalo, or is he actually the player that we thought he was? And so his OPS at home was 769, and away, I don't have the number here, but I believe it was in the 900s. So he ended up with 92 runs, 116 RBIs, 32 home runs, and 12 steals. I rank him where I do because he only had a 6% walk rate and a 25% K rate. Again, I just can't, unless you're Byron Buxton, I can't get behind those kinds of numbers. But you can't ignore his counting stats. To round out that tier for me, Brian Reynolds at 13 and Luis Robert at 14. Reynolds is, again, taking into account biases, he's the kind of player that I would want 10 out of 10 times. 300 hitter, 11% walk rate. He doesn't hit for much power, but his power, I think, comes from volume of at-bats more so than it does actually having power. He was 51st percentile in average exit velocity, 48th in hard hit, 68th in barrel, but he gets on base, right? Like if he's the number 2 hitter in, or number 3 hitter in a really good lineup, like I could see him scoring 110 runs and maybe driving in 90 and hitting 25, 30 home runs. He has a sub 40% ground ball rate last year, 13% launch angle, which isn't perfect, but it's not bad. And he only struck out 10.7%, or a swinging strike rate of 10.7%. Reynolds is he's my type of player. I think you can pick him comfortably. So his current ADP is 87.17. So you're taking him in the 5th, 6th round, 7th round. And he's the kind of player, if he's your outfielder, is your outfield 2, he's the perfect kind of outfield 2. If you're able to get like an Acuna or someone who can steal a couple of bags, and Reynolds is your next guy, like you're pretty set the outfield. And from a real life perspective, I love him. I think he's a really, really solid ball player. The last one where I'm really interested to hear what you have to think is Luis Robert. He's my number 14 and at the bottom of my tier 3, but his Fantrax ADP is 23.11. So according to Fantrax, he's a 2nd round pick in any league. I saw you got the average exit velocity of 91 miles per hour. You have a max exit of 118, launch angle of 14 degrees, but his sample set is so small and he's been hurt. I don't understand why he's going so early. They must be seeing something I don't see. He also doesn't really take walks, right? So at that pick, you've got to assume he's hitting 30 to 40 home runs and hitting close to 300, right? With double-digit steals to justify picking him in the bottom of the 2nd round. What did you see when you looked at him?
I agree. He's way overpriced. I really had a hard time getting past the chase rate, but when he does make contact, his exit velocity on flies and liners. So when he lifts the ball, it's 96.3, which is really, really good.
Mhm.
He did cut his strikeout rate, but he continued to reach at pretty much a top 3 level. And that just that kind of volatility that brings is not something that I'm comfortable with.
Right.
But he's projected for what's how many plate appearances? Okay, 134 games, 32 home runs and 13 steals. I mean, he certainly has the tools to carry that.
Right.
But what kind of average is that going to come with? And I don't know. He, like you said, the sample size is just so small. It's just so hard to
Right.
ignore the tools because they're so loud.
He's one of those players that I would love to have. If he's my outfield 3, outfield 4, absolutely. But at that price, I will let someone else take the risk every time. Right. If someone else wants to take him in the bottom of the second round, like, have at it. It doesn't mean that I don't think he's going to be a great player. I think he has the talent to be a great player. It's just not going to be me. He reminds me a lot, not because they're Cuban, but he reminds me a lot of the helium that Yasiel Puig got when he first came up. Hits the ball incredibly hard, super talented. Like, you want to see him succeed because he was such an incredible athlete, and he just wasn't that player. Doesn't mean that's who Robert is. It's just to say that I'm not taking him in the second round. That's me. My last 2 outfielders are Starling Marte and Randy Arozarena. I don't want to spend too much time. I think Marte is pretty much, we know who he is. He's a 10 to 12 home run, like 35 to 40 stolen base player that hits the ball into the ground. He had a 50% plus ground ball rate over the last few years. Really low launch angle. His BABIP last year was 372. The Citi Field where he signed with New York is not necessarily the best, park for right-handed power. And he's 33. So, is his speed going to go away? Is his speed going to maintain? For me, best case scenario with Starling Marte is like 290, 12 to 15 home runs and 40 steals. He's still not providing you any RBIs. And at an outfield 1, 2, 3, wherever you pick him, it's really rough to try to make up RBIs at a different position if you can't get him from someone like Starling Marte. So I rank him at 15 because I think you have to value 40 steals, but he's not a player I'd be taking there. And then the last one for me is Randy Arozarena, current ADP 71.87. I think he's 2020. You can kind of lock that in the bank, but there's so much swing and miss in his profile that I don't know that there's much more than 2020, and I could see him flaming out in a couple of years. What do you see in those last couple of positions?
Yeah, I think we spoke on everyone else in my list here. I did not have Marte in my top 16 yet. I don't think there's enough power
Right.
To warrant consideration. Certainly the speed is valuable. And Rosarena I considered as well. Yeah, I continue to be surprised by how low the counting stats are for the Rays, given how prolific their offense was, just in terms of overall team production. So spread,
right?
But only a 313 OBP,
right?
So I had him outside. Yeah, I just going through my list. I will just highlight Teoscar. I had it 10. I had him over Springer because I think he's shown that he is going to contribute a little bit with the speed, and I do think the power is real. Springer, I assume you had him out because of health.
Yep, for sure.
Leading off of that team with power in a park that is a home run park. I think it's a great fit for him. Robert, we talked about. I think I have him too high. Yelich at 13. For me, someone that has a 370 OBP that bats second or third every single day, and who hits the ball as hard as he does. I have to trust we've talked a little bit about track record tonight. I think again, quality of contact, hitting the ball hard. He had an issue with this long chango last year, but I'm will take someone who with that kind of plate approach, that kind of position in the order and a history of production there as outfielder, and then have Mullins at 14. I question how much of the power is going to stick. And that's the reason why I have him ranked there. And then the last three, Castellanos, Reynolds, and O'Neill. Castellanos, to me, he swings a ton, makes a league average contact rate, but does have barrel the ball at a 2% rate. Kind of reminds me of maybe a little bit more of a better hitter but like a Nolan Arenado, like an accumulator in the outfield, kind of park dependent, like we talked about. Reynolds, you spoke about very well. I always thought he had more. He's a top 75 home plate to first, but he's only forecast for 4 steals. I think he can do more. But looking at his history, the most he's ever had is 5. So maybe that's all he's going to do. And O'Neill's, his September last year, he's going really high because of the way he finished. How much of that is repeatable without continued, to his credit, he's adjusted his approach. He did improve his swinging strike rate. He did improve his carry, but it's still really high. So I think he has a little bit of ways to go, but not dissimilar from Robert. Really loud tools.
So
yeah.
Who do you have? You may have covered it. Who do you have in your kind of just outside of the top 16 that we'll cover in next week's pod for Outfield 2? What players do you have there that you want to mention?
Yeah, the guys that were on the cut line for me were Frommill and JD, Eloy, which is probably the closest, Giancarlo, Marte we talked about, Haniger and Winker, Rosarina, Soler, Bellinger, and Benintendi.
It's interesting. So I have Springer, Eloy Jimenez, Giancarlo Stanton, JD Martinez, Christian Yelich, Jesse Winker, and Mitch Haniger on that same list. The only one, so Yelich is a wild card. You ranked him in your top 16, obviously. I think it's pretty clear that if he can elevate the ball, he's potentially even in that tier 1, tier 2 area, but he just can't elevate the ball, or he didn't last year. The only other one worth mentioning is Eloy Jimenez. I think he's got tremendous power and tremendous hit tool. But he falls in that same bucket for me as Yordan Alvarez does and Aaron Judge, where he offers so little speed that he's at best a 4 tool player. And because he's been hurt and he hasn't really done it in a full season, I can't rank him in the top 16. I'd rather take a Marte or a Rosarena who is proven to give me stats that I need over the potential of an Eloy Jimenez. Do you have any who's your outfield risers and fallers, or do you have someone who you really believe in that's going to be much better than where they're being picked currently, or someone who you think is being way overvalued?
Yeah, so I think for me, I would be lower than the market on Mullins. I would not pay for a repeat. And I think for a riser, I think I have Alvarez a little bit higher. I think a little bit higher than you, and I think a little bit higher than the market. In our draft, I wanted to draft him from the second round on. I think we made the right choice there, but at any rate, I just see him as an ascending player. In fact, he played all year last year, kind of hopefully put the knee issues, those questions behind him, played a little bit in the outfield, not to gain eligibility there.
Right.
Is only 24 years old. I'm just, speed caveats aside, he would be someone I would push up the board to try to get him if the team construction made sense. And that would be my question if you. I know you're going to do your riser and faller, but what from a team construction standpoint, since this is redraft focused,
right?
What would your build need to look like for you to take one of these guys who are a 0 speed, where you feel like you could add them and get the benefit and not compromise your build, or would you just not consider that at all?
No, I would. So I build my teams kind of OPS out. And so I don't think too much about speed. I try to build in, 10 steals, 12 steals, anywhere you can find, like Trout, Harper, Betts, Tucker, Buxton, you're getting 10 to 15 stolen bases from those guys, right? And that's super valuable. But I'm not passing on a bat that I believe in, who I think is a 900 to 1,000 OPS guy, because they don't have steals. I'm just not. I think steals are variable, right? We don't know who's going to run and when and why. I could pick Alvarez over Mullins or Buxton, knowing Alvarez is a power player, and pick up Nicky Lopez, be the manager that picks up Nicky Lopez on the waiver wire, and totally support Jordan Alvarez and his misgivings or opportunities with a Nicky Lopez, and win the championship, right? So power to me, like, I know that the idea is you have to find speed, you want consistent speed, power is easier to find, but in my mind, that big power at positions of need is much more difficult for me to find consistently than it is to find a pop-up stolen base guy. That's my personal approach. If you're going to put Alvarez and Judge in front of me instead of, say, Mullins or Tyler O'Neill or Marte or Rosarena, I'm taking OPS every time. The other thing about OPS for me is it impacts multiple stats. So OPS impacts runs, it impacts home runs, it impacts RBIs potentially. And that's important to me. Stolen bases is a one-off, right? So for me, I would much prefer to take the player that gets like a Jordan Alvarez over any of the others.
Very well. So who's your riser and faller?
So my riser is Brian Reynolds.
Okay.
In large part because the more we dig and the more we talk about these things, I value predictability and consistency. And I see a 300 hitter, right? I see a 300 hitter with a near 400 on base. And if you can do that and have a 500, 600 plate appearances, you look, and for him, it's 20 to 30 home runs. Average is almost as much of a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow as stolen bases are at this point in time. And if you can take a guy with that many plate appearances and guarantee a 300 average, to me, that's incredibly valuable. So I'm a fan. And I think that I don't know that he's going to have a better season than he had last season, but I think at an 87 ADP, he's being vastly undervalued at this point in time. And if O'Neill Cruz or Henry Davis or Nick Gonzalez or any of those Pirates that are on the come can actually get on base a little bit, I think you're looking at, Brian Reynolds is going to be an even better player than he is right now. I love the skill set. I absolutely love the skill set. My faller is Tyler O'Neill. Super high BABIP, tons of swing and miss. Not the kind of profile that I believe in. It was a 366 BABIP and a 16.2% swinging strike rate. I don't think there's a lot to say past that for me.
Okay.
Agreed. Just not, again, if he repeats what he did last season, so be it. I don't see that as anything but being lucky for a second year in a row if he does it. And then, so draft strategy, do you have any kind of like strategy around picking outfielders, or at least picking premier outfielders, since we're doing 1 through 16?
Yeah, I think, we play in a 3 outfielder league in our dynasty league. We're working on this NFBC entry where we have 5 outfielders.
Right.
As the game the last couple of years, there's more and more platoons. I would say maybe outside of first base, there's more platoons in the outfield, especially in left.
Right.
And then in center field, it's such a valuable defensive position, it's one of the few positions where teams will actually value defense over offense. Not everyone does philosophically, but some teams do make that choice.
Right.
And so I think it's shallower than people realize.
Right.
I think what it's great about it is that there's all different skill sets. So it's a great way to sort of construct your team.
Yep.
You can find guys that are balanced. You can find guys that have a carrying tool one way or another.
Right.
But to me, the challenge is, you know, finding plate appearances.
Yep.
To really compete, to win, you have to have guys who, you know, have plate appearances, because you have to find 3 guys that can do that.
Right.
And you're not going to find 3 superstars, most likely, you know. So, you know, I think that's what's interesting me about the strategy of the position.
For me, it's if I can't get one of the top 5, meaning, you know, Acuna through Tucker, I know that I'm going to have to really pay attention to roster construction. You know, you take an Alvarez, you need steals. You take a Marte, you need OPS. And then with regards to the top 5, I think Acuna is the only one that I would reach for, that I would, you know, if Acuna's current ADP is, I think it's 7 point something, if I'm not mistaken. But if I'm not taking Acuna, I'm not necessarily reaching for Trout or for Soto or for Harper. I love them, but I'm not reaching for them. And so I'm just looking up Acuna's average ADP. Let's see, his ADP currently is 10.94. I think I would go as high, honestly, I'd probably go as high as 4 for Acuna. Like I might debate Acuna and Jose Ramirez if I had the 4th pick in the draft. But I'm not doing that for Trout, Harper, or Soto. And then again, the rest, it's about roster construction. But the reality is, I actually think outfield is a little bit deeper than you do. If I find another priority to be, or another position to be more of a priority, and, you know, say Mitch Haniger or George Springer or Brian Reynolds is my outfield 1, like I'm going to be okay with that. And I'm going to be able
for
to
sure
build around it with depth that, that I, you know, it made me, obviously it means you're prioritizing outfielders a little more than you would if you got an Acuna or a Soto in round 1. But there is enough depth for me to be able to build it out. I do worry in our NFBC team that with 5 outfielders, it's hard to find that 4th and 5th outfielder. I think we lucked out with Tommy Pham as our 5th. We got Benintendi. Those types of players aren't easy to find, and I think the draft fell in a way that we were able to roster those players. All in all, there aren't a lot of, you know, incredibly well-rounded outfielders. There's maybe 7 or 8 that you can get steals and homers from, and then from that point forward, it's more about specific roster construction as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and I don't want to misspeak. I don't think it's going to say shallow to get your outfield 1. Like you can definitely, it's a talented deep position for that. But you can't get 3.
Right.
You know what I mean? 3 Haniger, you can't do 3 Hanigers. You know what I mean?
Right.
So you can get him as your number 1, and you're not dead in the water. But it's like, okay, now you got to do it twice more.
Right. I think you're almost better off with if you're looking for 3 kind of badass outfielders, you're better off taking 2, and then and I'm not saying it's because that's my team, because it's the way my team is set up. I've got Acuna as 1, Buxton as 2, and then potentially Julio Rodriguez as 3. But for me, you're better off taking a flyer on someone that you really believe in as your outfield 3 over the course of the year, and then taking someone who you know will get at bats but isn't necessarily great as your outfield 3 until that player comes up. So if you can roster a Riley Green or a Julio Rodriguez and not count on them until June or July, then I think you have the potential to have 3 really good outfielders.
Yeah.
Which brings us to, obviously, our outfield prospects.
Nice transition. Professionally done.
Right? We can both agree on Julio as one.
Yeah.
Did you dig too much into Julio? What did you find when you looked into him?
I didn't dig because I mean I hear so much about him and pulling up his grades and what he did last year from quality of contact and all that, and it's reinforced what I hear all the time about his potential. The only thing I saw is, and I'd be interested to get your take, is I saw he had a 40 grade for pitch selection. Does he take a walk? Is he becoming more selective?
Yeah, so his walk rate was 14% in AA last year.
That's very good.
Now it's hard to discern, is it them pitching around him, or is it Rodriguez actually understanding how to take a walk?
Okay.
It goes back to everything we were talking about in the Major League outfield rankings, which is, do you prefer approach or do you prefer like the player that just puts the bat on the ball, right? Like I think we tend to like the player that can discern between a strike and a ball, but that doesn't necessarily make the player better all the time.
Right.
The encouraging thing for me, so to me, he's such a talented hitter. He's 290 and 30 home runs and 100 RBIs and 100 runs pretty much, starting maybe in 2023. He's that kind of hitter. He's a Manny Ramirez type of bat to ball talent, right? That's able to hit the ball the opposite way with power, hit mistakes out, understand what's coming. He's very instinctual. To me, there's two factors that impact what he's going to do in 2022. One is if the Mariners put him in center field, which is a non-zero possibility, is he going to be able to balance playing center field and hitting, right? We saw with Kelenic that Jared Kelenic wasn't necessarily able to balance the two, but Kelenic was such a horrible center fielder, and Kyle Lewis, may not be an outfielder, right? He may be a full-time DH. And Julio Rodriguez has displayed the athleticism to be able to play center field. That is a possibility, is something to think about. The other question is he stole 21 bags last year. So imagine Manny Ramirez, who can steal double-digit bags per year, right? He made it his goal last year to steal more bases. He understood that was something he wasn't able to do, and he's able to slim down a little bit and steal some bases. The other thing, and I don't want to put very much value at all into preseason, off-season videos, but he had a pretty long follow through with one hand for up until this year.
Yeah.
Beautiful swing, but a follow through with one hand. And I saw a video of him keeping both hands on the bat and shortening his swing. And with that kind of power and already displaying the kind of bat control that allows him to hit 300, if he can actually shorten that swing and still hit with the same kind of power, like, he's not going to strike out. I don't see him as a high strikeout kind of hitter. He might very well be like a right-handed Juan Soto in some ways, right? So to me, the sky's the limit. From a dynasty perspective, I currently have him at the top of my second tier. So he's my number 5. He's above Tucker, above Betts, above Riley Green, above Alvarez, just below Harper and Trout. But I'm prepared to move him up if I see anything from him in the first couple of weeks during the season. My number 2 is Riley Green. I think that's kind of industry consensus. Left-handed hitter, real like 300 hitter in Detroit. I I worry about him. There's a ton of swing and miss in his profile.
Yeah, I was a little taken aback by the strikeouts this year.
153 strikeouts and 558 plate appearances. Um,
And age to level, he wasn't that young. They didn't push him. He's had a very steady progression. So I was just surprised by that,
Right.
given the grades and what I know about him.
I think that there's more bust potential in Riley Green than really we've talked about up to this point. We saw someone like a Nomar Mazara come up and hit really well as a left-handed, 300 hitter with some power, and they just kind of figured him out. And so Riley Green is, I wonder if there's some value that we're crossing over with between fantasy and actual prospect rankings, because he has the potential to play center field in Detroit, where he's not necessarily the fantasy player that we think he is based on the rankings, and that some of those rankings are taking into account his swing and miss. That said, if he's 325, 30 home runs, I don't think anybody's blinking an eye. That's what everybody expects from him. But I do want to see him before I draft him where he's going, or before I roster him in a dynasty league. I want to see those strikeouts drastically reduced. For me, that's always a huge red flag. Number three is Zach Veen. Number 4 is Robert Hassel. And then on down, it's Luis Matos, Vidal Brujan, Corbin Carroll, George Valera, Brennan Davis down at 9, and Jaron Duran at 10. Veen, it's hard to trust Colorado, quite honestly. They haven't really produced a good hitting prospect in years. Brendan Rodgers, I think, would be a much better hitter out of any other organization other than Colorado. I think they kind of ruined him in some ways. He's hitting 50% ground balls and cores, which is completely unjustifiable. But Veen put up tons of power. He's got a nice approach. He had 36 steals last season, which nobody anticipated, but he did it in 53 attempts. So it's more a product of volume than I think anything else. But it's hard not to look at a left-handed hitter with a good approach and plus power in Colorado and not be excited. Hassel has a solid hit tool. I think he's like a 60 hit tool. Nice approach, steals bags, but we're waiting on power. And so a player who does so imagine his power comes a little bit, but not to a 30 home run power sort of place. Then you're looking at a 290 hitter with 12 to 15 home runs and 15 steals. Like, what is that actually worth when it comes to fantasy? So he's my number 4, but I don't see the same upside others do. The comp that I saw was Michael Brantley. Luis Matos is my number 5. Tremendous bat to ball skills, 2020 guy, but free swinger, doesn't take a walk. That's a little bit scary for a minor league prospect for me. If you throw him sliders and balls out of the zone over and over again, he's going to chase. And then again, Brujan, who I think has a nice approach, steals bags, a little bit of power. He's lower because we don't know what position he's going to play. That's a little bit of that's hard for me to really peg him. Corbin Carroll, plus speed, good hitter. Question is he Brett Butler? Is he, Brett Butler with a little bit of power? He's also hurt last year, and Arizona is not the greatest organization to develop. George Valera is number 8, 18% walk rate last year, tons of power, kind of a 3 true outcome kind of guy. Lots of idiosyncrasies in his swing, but the numbers speak for themselves. I like him. He's a guy I keep an eye on. If he hits well in the first half of 2022, he's a guy I might roster. I don't think he would cost a ton to acquire. Brennan Davis, my number 9, much lower than consensus, but tons of swing and miss and not a ton of speed. And so in order to really reach his potential or get to the place where he's being valued currently, he's got to fix the swing and miss completely, because he's not stealing bags. So at best, he's a 3.5, 4 tool player. A 270 hitter, 260, 270 hitter with 35 home runs. And up to this point, we haven't seen that based on the swing and miss. So not a player I'm willing to take a chance on. I call him Diet Chris Davis. We'll see what Matt has to say about that. But my characterization of Brandon Davis is Diet Chris Davis. And then 10 is Jaron Duran. 96 percentile speed last year, shown the ability to walk in the minor leagues, has some pop in his bat. And really what that is just that steals are hard to find. So if I'm going to rank Starling Marte and Randy Arozarena 15 and 16 in my outfielders list, Jaron Duran deserves to be on the outfield prospect list. I don't like a 25-year-old prospect, but I do think that he'll have the opportunity to play. And if he hits double-digit home runs and can eclipse 20 steals with Boston this year, that's a pretty valuable player. Do you have any thoughts on disagreements on some of those outfield observations, or any of your own that you want to contribute?
I don't have any pushback on your list per se. I have some. I did my top 4, and I'm going to share more of as I have a chance to work through some of the other names in the future episodes here. Julio number 1, given the raw power and the hit tool. I mean, look at what I've kind of become fond of doing is looking at who are the players of value at these positions now, and what is the potential of these prospects to be that type of player. And you look at the Harper, the Sotos, the guys posting a 400 OBP with great power, 8 to 10 steals. I mean, he fits that profile. I had Carroll and Green at second and third. I kept flipping them. I was, as we talked about, just taken aback by the swing and miss that Riley showed, despite having such a high mark on his hit tool. I'm just confused by that, and obviously his prospects for power in Comerica, he does not have a great home park, and his batted ball data was less than eye-popping,
right?
Despite posting a 300 average at 2 levels this year. Overall, I'm really high on him. I think his makeup is off the charts, and it's the pedigree. But I had him at 3. The reason I had Carroll at 2 was he showed a really increase in power before he hurt his shoulder pretty seriously. I, like you, share concerns about investing in the Arizona Diamondbacks prospect, but his max velocities and barrel rates were really quite good. Just below Julio in terms of average exit, 5% below on hard hit rate. So when you have someone that has a 70 grade on their hit tool and has 70 grade on their speed tool and is showing power, to me, that's, even in Arizona system, that's really interesting. And then I would say my Vidal Brujan, someone who's close to the majors, is Josh Lowe. I have number 4. And we talked about Seth Mullins and the value of a guy who's 2020 and plays every day.
Right.
Josh Lowe was a first-round pick. Is a left-handed bat, has really good on-base skills. Plays a plus center field and has a 60 grade raw and a 60 grade speed. So there is some swing and miss in the game. In his game, he's gotten progressively showed a steady improvement in that area. But was the only player to go 2020 in the minors other than Witt last year. So we know Tampa's crowded. Tampa's not afraid to platoon people. He is left-handed. I think all those things are valid concerns, but from a speed, defense, power standpoint, and on base skills, and being close to the majors, he's someone that I would rank, and I do think highly of him.
I love everything about Josh Lowe other than the swing and miss. And I think I think if he solves that, he's right up there. He's probably my number 3, right? If he actually solves that swing and miss issue. But they have to trade Kiermaier.
Mhm.
I think to trade Kiermaier, or I know that Austin Meadows is kind of on the block right now, and they have to trade one of them in order to free up enough at bats for Josh Lowe to factor into the future. So I just pulled up his fan graphs, and he's never had a strikeout rate lower than 24%, which gives me pause. But to your point, last year he had 22 home runs and 26 stolen bases in AAA. And he's a first round pick. So obviously there's an investment in Josh Lowe. It's, again, if he can solve his swing and miss, I'm all over him.
Yeah.
As of now, I don't know.
That's one of those things where in minor leagues we don't quite have the plate discipline metrics that we have once they get to the majors. So I'm interested to
100%.
see, what once he does get to the majors, whether that's in 22 or 23. This is the last year of Kiermaier's contract, so even if he doesn't get the opportunity in 22, 23 the job should be wide open. And I guess I would say it seems like 75-25. 75% of people think that Brujan's going to be the center fielder when Kiermaier leaves.
Right.
I'm one of the 25 that I think Lowe is that player, and I think Brujan's more of a utility.
I think I think Brujan plays
outfield, but
I think Brujan helps at second, like to platoon a little bit with Brandon Lau, and then plays all over the outfield. I also think that they trade Manuel Margot at some point as well, which gives Brujan a lot more value if Margot's gone. It's just so hard with them to really predict. And to your point earlier, there's no one player on that team that, besides maybe Wander Franco, that's going to have enough plate appearances to actually, post huge counting stats, right? Like you look at their offense, and their offense is top 10, top 5, but you don't necessarily have that carrying player.
Yeah.
And that makes me a little bit nervous as well. I'll be interested to hear your kind of second group of outfield prospects next week.
Yeah, I have some guys I've tagged that are really interesting to me, but I wanted to be able to have them in a more assimilated order. I didn't want to throw names, so
absolutely. We'll dig into that next week for sure.
Yeah, I'll tell you, and you're gonna probably very astutely correct me, but who we comp for Lowe is who I think of as like a George Springer type. Springer had swing and miss coming up through Houston.
Sure.
But having that player who has great on base and is a thumper, has power at the top of the lineup.
Right.
There's a lot of ways to be successful. You know what I mean?
Right.
So
I
don't
agree.
know how one's right-handed and one's left-handed, but that sort of idea of a power speed center fielder who has great on base. Just I guess maybe less so a comp, but more like here's a player who has a similar skill set who's been really successful.
Right.
Despite a part of their game that is a concern. You know what I mean?
I'd love to see. I think Josh Lowe in another organization, if he's been taught the skills that Tampa Bay can teach, and then they moved him somewhere, would be much more successful, potentially much more successful than he would be in Tampa Bay in and of themselves, right?
Yeah.
Just because I think he would get more of an opportunity to play every day. And not, there's so much talent in that organization. There's so much talent coming up that he could be a strong side platoon and get 400 at bats for the rest of his career. And nobody would be surprised. Right.
Right. Yeah,
so I think that if he's really going to turn into the star that I think both of us think he has the skills to do, if he can fix the swing and miss, he's going to be more likely to achieve that in a different organization. The other thing is a Tampa Bay home park is rough, right? So, and I'm not doubting his skill set, and I'm not doubting his talent as much as I just wonder about some of the other stuff. Whereas, like, is he the superior player to Jarren Duran? Absolutely, like 100%, much better player. But Duran is almost like a folk hero in Boston already. They have a need. He is, right? They have a need in the outfield, and he's really fast, which means that from a fantasy standpoint, there's something to be had there. Would I prefer Josh Lowe on my fantasy or real team? Like 10 out of 10 times. Absolutely. I just don't, if we're valuing players and what they're going to be worth in fantasy in the long term.
Yep.
It's a hard one. I know you own Josh Lowe in our league, and I don't. I think that was a great trade. I totally understand why you've invested in him, but I just, again, I set the like successful fantasy profile over under at like 40% for Josh Lowe.
Yeah.
Just given his kind of exterior uncontrollable variables.
Yeah.
Do you have what's your open forum question for me this week?
My open forum question was, we've talked a lot about like dream baseball trips.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked a lot about opening day
Mm-hmm.
festivities, the special moments.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to ask you, just on like your normal day, like
Mhm.
your normal weekday, what's your routine? Or like, I don't say the best day, but like what's a good baseball day? Like what do you like to do just on a normal day? Like you're not
From
traveling,
off season
you're
or
not going to the game.
off
but like
season during
what,
the season?
huh?
Off season or during the season?
Oh no, during the season. During
Okay.
the season.
So,
Game day.
all right. So when I wake up during baseball season, I wake up about 20 minutes before I typically would. So if I wake up at 7 a.m., typically it's like 6:30, 6:40, the alarm during baseball season. And that's so I can set my fantasy lineup. I can take in the news that may have happened overnight. I set my lineup early in the morning before I started anything else, so I don't forget anything. And then from there, I have Major League Baseball trade rumors alerts are programmed to my phone. So any kind of transaction in baseball pops up on my phone between when I wake up and when the first game starts. And then I typically will find, I interestingly actually on Microsoft Calendar, I calendar all the sports that I want to watch. So I know on Sunday night, I know what the rest of my week looks like and I can plan around it. So from a fantasy baseball standpoint, if I have a pitcher going in an East Coast game, like a 4 o'clock game, I'll calendar that game. And then usually, a lot of the Central Time games will tend to get pushed out unless it's someone I really want to watch. And then my 7 o'clock watch is always the Mariners. So, well, almost unless they're in a different time zone, but most of the time they're in Pacific time zone. So I'll watch the Mariners game as my 7 o'clock game. If I happen to own like a Dodger starter or a Giant starter, then I'll make some adjustments and I'll do a side-by-side on my computer. Like my computer's showing the Dodgers game and then the normal television showing the Mariners game sort of situation. But for me, it's whether I'm cooking, if I'm cooking a meal, then it's my computer with the baseball game on while I'm chopping vegetables, right? And the sound on. Or from barbecuing, it's my computer outside with me or my phone playing MLB radio, listening to a game outside. But for me, it really is from the minute I wake up till the end of the West Coast game, there's some sort of baseball consumption. And then sprinkled in, of course, are the text messages between you, me, and Matt talking about our league or, like letting the other player know that their player is injured, that sort of thing. But it's interesting you say
I prefer the home run text over your player's injured text.
Exactly. But it's interesting because I was saying to my family this week, my mother, fell and broke her fibula this week. And she's someone who cooks all the time and is always like gardening and super active. She's 70. And I said to my mom, I was like, it's really interesting to think about because I can't remember being bored. Literally, I can't ever remember being bored. And I think it's the product, well, I don't think I know, it's the product of loving sports, specifically baseball. There's always something to consume. And so, especially since the advent of the internet, like there's literally always an article we can read, or there's always rankings we can look at. There's always MLB The Show to play, right? There's always OOTP to play. There's always a text message from you or from Matt or any of my other friends about fantasy baseball, or an article to read, like in the actual newspaper. So like I said, I said to my mother, I haven't been bored. I can't remember the last time I've been bored. Do I want to break my leg? No. But if I'm laid up in bed, like I'll have plenty to do. You know what I mean? And so again, to answer your question, my day is beginning to end baseball in some form. I'm I'm with some friends right now, and I was explaining my baseball database and explaining the podcast. And I just said, like, they're like, well, how do you know all this stuff? Right. And I said, it's the same way, like whatever it is that you're interested in, it's the exact same idea. Like if you're interested in it, you're consuming it all day. The way that smartphones work and today's society, you're always in consumption mode. And for me, that happens to be baseball. It's what is interesting too is the only time I really sit down and consume an entire game start to finish and really understand the nuts and bolts of it are Mariners games. Like 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. with the Mariners game is like pretty sacred time. It's just, that's the team I love. I want to know everything about it. It's not, I'm invested from a fantasy standpoint, but I'm watching because I'm a Mariners fan, ultimately. How would you answer that?
Nice. Well, I like that you started it for the first in the morning. I didn't anticipate that. So I guess I'll start at the end of the night. I'm pretty disciplined about not taking my phone in the bedroom. So I'm also really disciplined through the evening of not box score jumping. It just creates a lot of tension and stress, especially in the early innings. If I have a pitcher, maybe say has a rough first inning, or I'll start spiraling and worrying.
Right.
So I really try to be disciplined and at the end of the night in terms of picking a game. And then, when it's bedtime, I'll leave it and I don't box score surf at night. So in the morning, the first thing I do is listen to fantasy. The Athletic has a show in the morning. It's Fantasy in 15. But they'll go kind of like it's that morning news. So anything that happened late. So I'll listen to that while I'm getting ready in the morning or making coffee. And then as soon as I'm at the computer, I'd like you to look at what is the plan for the day. Hopefully, that's one thing I love about fantasy is hopefully having a pitcher every day. So knowing like who's pitching, because those are the games I like to watch. So plan that out, and then I'll jump on Fantrax and see over there any waiver transactions that went through last night. So that's kind of the start of the day. And then in terms of the evening, and I loved being on the West Coast. I'm going to miss that because the game starts so early. But I'm also working third shift, so I'll still be able to listen to West Coast baseball at night. But yeah, for me, like usually I'll pick 1 or 2 games. I'll do the MLB split screen sometimes and do 2 games. Sometimes like my pitcher on one and the game I'm interested in on the other. I kind of plan that out ahead and then have those 2 screens going. And then once dinner time hits, I may probably switch to radio, and listen to the game. Maybe look at the scores. Once the early games are done, allow myself to go through the box scores and tag mark that, and then kind of just wind it down for the night. Yeah, I love the rhythm and pace of baseball.
Right.
That every day, and just like I said, I have some measures in place to just protect my trying to stay more even keel, because I'm so invested in results day to day, and it's a marathon, not a sprint. So I'm trying to get better about learning that. So that's my answer.
Right.
I love watching my guys pitch. Obviously our hitters, our lineup hit every day, play every day, but like the days when like Otani's on the mound, or having a chance to watch Walker Buehler live, and that stuff, I love that.
Right. I have to say that, so I didn't add that Minnesota and Chicago White Sox games tend to take precedence as well. So if I'm watching like say a Red Sox game, and then there's a Twins game at 5 or a White Sox game at 5, that's the game that I end up watching because of Buxton and because of Moncada. Buxton being injured so much in the last couple of years has been like, it almost makes the games where he does play like that much more exciting for me. Because I love him so much. The other factor that I didn't mention is that home park actually impacts whether I want to watch the game or not. And so I love watching games at Fenway. Like I've been to Fenway. I love it. And so I may not actually have a fantasy player playing in a Fenway game, but I love watching games at Fenway. Same with Wrigley. Same with, I like watching Baltimore games. I don't have any shares of Adley Rutschman, but when he comes up, like I'll for sure watch Baltimore Orioles games because of Rutschman. I hate the Yankees. I don't really watch Yankees games at Yankee Stadium because I just don't like them. I might watch a Yankees Red Sox game because it's the rivalry, but other than that, I'm not interested.
If you want to watch a Sunday night game, that's all you can watch.
Right. Well, now that we drafted Loizaga in NFBC, I might be watching a little more Yankees baseball. But yeah, I think it's super cool how we all have like these very defined routines with regards to our baseball consumption. And it's our favorite part of the year. And we make decisions minute to minute based on our ability to consume the right baseball at the right time, which I think is just super cool. Super, super cool. So my question for you, along the lines of the previous week's questions, is if you could do anything, like what's your dream opening day? What's your dream opening day from just a realistic, like you are where you are standpoint? And then if you could do anything for opening day, what would you do?
What was the first part again? If I
Just,
am where I am?
yeah, so you're in Pennsylvania right now. Like
Yeah.
if you can take the day off for Major League opening day, in a
Which
month.
I have done, by the way.
Awesome. What does that look like for you? From a food standpoint, from a consumption standpoint?
Yeah, trying to remember. I think it would be planning out which games I want to watch. Starting starting at first thing in the morning. Hopefully, there's schedule out where there's not a bunch of overlap. You can watch games in the 1 o'clock hour, the 4 o'clock hour, the 7, and then the West Coast.
Right.
Knowing who the opening day starters are, that's one of the things that's hard about the beginning. If you have a lot of top line starters, like all your pitchers are going that same day,
right?
So it can be a little uneven. Yeah, I mean that's essentially what I would do is just relax and plan out what I want to watch and listen to, and enjoy as much of it as I could. If I could do anything, honestly, it's all the stuff that you've been writing about and things like that. It's like I would want to come and spend the day with you. You know what I mean? Because I haven't really done that. Like I think a couple of times, handful of times we went with Matt, and like we went got a drink and watched the game. I think it was at the World Series though. It was an opening day.
Right.
And I know I came over one Sunday and you grilled out and we watched some games, but yeah, just listening to like all your inspiration and ideas around like food and opening day and like honestly, like if I could come spend the day with you, like I want to do all that.
Yeah, awesome.
that would be my dream scenario, to be around other people who value it as much as I do.
Right.
And to share that, and that's not an experience I've had.
Right.
Because in my life, like I don't interact with anyone on a day-to-day basis that cares about it as much as I do.
Right.
And so they maybe tolerate it or whatever, but they can't relate to it.
Right.
So I think if I could do anything, it would be spending time with people who have that same, that means as much to them as it does to me. And that would be really incredible. That would be what I wish for.
So that's what I've been lucky enough to. I've had opening days with Brandon in our league where we've gotten together and it's just like literally first game to last game, and we're just sitting around eating all the foods that we love, taking a day off of work and watching baseball. I'd done it with Matt a couple of times, and that's been really, really fun. I think Matt, Brandon is a math processor, right? He builds his teams based on numbers, but I don't know that he's as invested in the personalities as we are. I've watched it with Matt where, we do that. And then we also have done in the past the NFL draft in the same manner, where we get together and it's about the food and the drink and being together and the commentary. So for me, from a dream standpoint, that's it, right? Like a perfect scenario would be like the three of us, and we would get together either at someone's home or out eating a meal and watching the early games and then going to the Mariners game. Like the Mariners are like the 7 o'clock opening day game. And so we would consume the first two games as, typical on TV, and then actually go to the Mariners game and be able to watch for that last game. I also have, tons of, like I've written on the blog, I have tons of ideas as far as what the different meals that I would love, but I love meal planning and cooking for people and entertaining, and to be able to like really meticulously plan out, what's for breakfast and what's for lunch, and are we taking food into the stadium for dinner, and how can I make this something that I can share with my friends that they wouldn't ordinarily have, or something that I do really well. Just adds to the importance and the excitement for me of opening day. But opening day is on par with Christmas. It's on par with birthdays, right? It's on par with anniversaries as far as I'm concerned. It's a day of celebration of the game that we love more than any other game. So opening day is very sacred, very, very sacred to me. I really, I can't express how much I'm both excited and hopeful that it happens when it's supposed to happen this year.
Do you think Logan Gilbert is the Mariners opening day starter? Or do you think they'll go with one?
No, I think Robbie Ray signed too big of a contract to not be.
Gotcha.
But I think Logan Gilbert is the truth. I think Logan Gilbert ends the season the number 2 starter, both fantasy and real baseball. I don't like, because we haven't come to an agreement as far as labor goes yet. It's so hard. Like, I don't want to actually talk about it, but man, Gilbert and Marco and Robbie Ray, if he's even 85% of what he was, 230 strikeouts, 220 strikeouts, and George Kirby's on the way, and Flexen, and the bullpen depth, and Seawald and Giles and Sadler, and God, man, I'm ready.
Did Munoz actually throw a pitch in the majors last year?
He did. Uh-huh.
Yeah, okay.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize he did, and you were talking about Eno and his stuff, and I was going through sorting and stuff, and Munoz had the highest stuff rating of anybody, but it was on a very few pitches.
He throws like 9 bajillion miles an hour, right? Yeah,
Does he know where it's going yet?
What's that?
Does he know where it's going?
Not necessarily, but I don't know that it matters. I think if he has some form of control and doesn't have any command, he's still going to be dominant. But yeah,
And they got him from San Diego.
He was
one of my franchises in OOTP. I played the Padres. It was in a future season, and he was their closer. And so it's like, he came from San Diego. It's crazy, man, how that game is in my head. Sometimes I mix up reality in that game.
Right.
I started a franchise during the pandemic, and I went like 6 or 7 seasons in.
Right. Well, you and I shared our season. I was playing MLB The Show, and you were playing OOTP, and it was, not to get too tangential, but it was difficult to differentiate between my real life and that season, because I was playing so much MLB The Show that those players became what I thought about, when I went to sleep. It was their statistics and their performance and roster building. And it was really difficult because he didn't have anything going on in the rest of our lives to differentiate between the game and our real lives.
Yeah.
That was totally wild and fun.
Yeah.
If we
All
can
right.
only have the
All right,
excuse to do that again, right?
I don't know. It takes so much. I mean, I had the time,
Right.
but yeah, I'm like trying to hold it at bay.
I love it.
I really am, because like once you go down, it just is so immersive.
It's the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
So we'll be back. I think middle of this week. Are we doing SP1? Or are we doing the second tier of outfielders?
I think second tier outfielder. Let's do kind of a.
So outfield 17 through 32 coming middle of this week. We'll do outfield 3 after that, and then we'll dig into pitchers, which I know you're incredibly excited for.
Yeah, I am.
Sweet.
All right.
Appreciate you, brother.
All right.
Have a good
Thanks.
night.
Peace.